Seems to me that over the last 10 weeks, God has been thundering in the ear of the people of Queensland. But I wonder how many have been listening. I believe it's one of the Puritans who said something like this: God whispers to us in our quiet moments, but he thunders to us in the darker providences. He whispers to us in the quiet moments, and he thunders to us in those dark providences. Friends, God has been thundering. Have you been listening? Significant flooding, as we know, has occurred in many areas of our state. We've been told that in recent days, 3/4 of Queensland has been declared a disaster zone. December 2010 was our state's wettest on record. The floods that have flowed since that time have left thousands without a home. There's been something like 35 deaths in that period of time, and still, I understand, 6 people are still missing. First, with Cyclone Tasha crossing the coast, dumping rain, and then, of course, the waters began to rise. Roads were cut and destroyed, washed away. Whole communities, towns were cut off, and thousands were needed to be evacuated. God was speaking. By the early part of January, the flood was being reported, remember, to be of biblical proportions, we were being told in the media. This time last month, in this very service, those of you who were here will remember that we considered the theme, that very theme, a flood of Bible proportions, and we looked into the Bible to consider the record of Noah's flood. Little did we know that night that within 24 hours, a cloudburst would occur an hour up the road from us, leading to what has been called an inland tsunami, washing houses and people away in the torrent. God was thundering. And next, it was our turn. Ipswich, and then Brisbane flooded by the swollen Bremer and Brisbane rivers. God has something to say. But has anyone been listening? The clean-up began when a number of us were involved, even locally, literally picking up and throwing away people's belongings. They lay there dumped on the side of the road like a rubbish tip. Life for many would never be the same again. And then just when things began to quieten down in Queensland, Cyclone Anthony crossed the coast near Bowen. And then, have you forgotten all these events? And then 4 days later, the largest, fiercest cyclone ever to hit our country, Category 5 Yazi, was with its destructive winds of up to 300 kilometres an hour. God was thundering. Have you been listening? Over the last 10 weeks, thousands of Queenslanders have had their lives turned upside down. What has God been saying? What is God saying to you tonight? God does speak, you know. He has a message, and it comes to us in the Bible. It's a message that he wants the people of Queensland to hear. It's a message that he wants all Queenslanders to hear. And I assume because you're here, you're a Queenslander. Checking everyone. Most of you, I know who you are. And I'm pretty sure, I'm safe to say, God has something to say to you as a Queenslander. James chapter 4 and verse 14. God says, "What is your life?" And then he answers his question. Your life? It is even a vapour that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. I wonder, can you see how relevant those words are as we live in this eventful and trying times in our state? What is your life? That's the question. What is your life? James here is speaking to people who had this tendency to live their lives as if God didn't exist. Sounds a bit like our time, doesn't it? People living their lives as if God doesn't exist. It does appear that the only time that people seem to evaluate their life is when they are facing death, or when they lose all that they have been living for. It can tend to cause them to stop and think about life, their life. Floods come, an unexpected inland tsunami strikes, a massive cyclone hits, and God says, "What is your life?" I want us to think about 4 things we find in James chapter 4, verses 13 and 14 this afternoon. And the first thing that James mentions here is what we call the audacity in life. James speaks of this in verse 13 of chapter 4. He says, "Come now, you who speak like this, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit." You can see if you've got a Bible in front of you, he's got it in quotations. James is like quoting what people often say, because this is how people often think. These people here are very sure of themselves. They speak with utter confidence about when they are going, about where they are going, about how long they're going to stay where they are going, of what they will do when they get to that place where they are going, and they're even confident about how successful they will be when they arrive in that place where they say that they are going. That's what they say in verse 13. "Today or tomorrow, we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and of course, we will make a profit." All of this with absolutely no reference or consideration about God. That is such a common attitude, isn't it? Could we even say that that is actually the Queensland way? That's just so normal. People thinking that they can live in God's world, breathe His air, eat His food, draw upon God's goodness, go about their lives with no thought about God. That is so common. Maybe that's you. No consideration to order your life, to make your plans according to God and His mind. Psalm number 10 describes this audacity in life. It says in Psalm number 10, verses 3 and 4, "For the wicked boasts of his heart's desire. He blesses the greedy and renounces the Lord. The wicked in his proud countenance does not seek God. God is in none of his thoughts." You see, to plan and to live your life with no thought about God is arrogance. That is actually what James goes on to say back in chapter 4 and verse 16. He says, "But now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil." Here God is saying then that talking, planning, living with no thought of God is arrogant. God looks upon that as evil. Such thinking, such attitude, God calls in Psalm 10, those people are wicked. That's God's description, that's God's summary, that's God's take of the situation. People living in God's world, living their lives, making plans as if God doesn't exist. And God looks at that and He says, that's arrogant. That's actually evil. That's wicked. And yet how patient is God? The vast majority of Queenslanders live like this. Perhaps you do as well. How gloriously patient God is with us. You think of it. God could have steered Yazi to have landfall over Cairns. It could have hit a population of 165,000 with full force. But no, it hit Cardwell. Population of what? 1,250. Or it hit Tully. Population 2,500. Now, the devastation was very real in those smaller places. But the mercy of God steered Yazzie away from Cairns with a population that was 66 times greater than Tully. God is so patient. People go on making their plans, living life as if God doesn't exist. God says that is boastful arrogance, it's wicked, it's evil. But still, as they do that, He is brilliantly kind. He is exquisitely patient. God is long-suffering toward you, my friend. Why? Well, God tells us in Romans chapter 2 that His goodness is designed, it has a purpose. And it's to bring you to repentance. It's to give you room, as it will, so that you might turn from your arrogant sin and turn to Him for forgiveness and salvation. So the first thing we see from these words in James is the audacity in life. But I want you to look now back at the verses, if you have a Bible there, and consider the second thing we see here, and that is the uncertainty of life. James says in verse 14, "You do not know what will happen tomorrow." Think about those words. You do not know what will happen tomorrow. How true is that? Not one of us really knows what's going to unfold tomorrow. Oh, you might think you've got a fairly good idea of what's going to occur on your Monday. But you don't really know. When we sat in this building this time last month, thinking of a flood in the Bible that took all those people away, we had no idea that within 24 hours a flood would rush through the Lockyer Valley and wash people away. There was someone in this meeting. One of the parents of one of the members was in this meeting, Ross Beejan. He was here. He had no idea that he would be stranded in Toowoomba the next night, unable to get down the range to get home to his wife and his son. We can't see ahead of time. We can't see one day. We can't see 1 year. We can't even see 1 minute. Now, we can look backwards. God has given us memories. And we can look back into the past. Sometimes our memories fail us, don't they? And we struggle to remember some things that have happened in the past. But we might keep a diary, maybe you keep a journal of what's happened in your life, and you can pull it out and you can read about things that happened in the past. And if you do that, you may read things that you've forgotten had happened with you. And there it is. It's all recorded about the past. We can get out the photos. Get out the digital prints, like was happening in our home this afternoon. Getting out the old scrapbook photos of former days, and you can look back at the past. Sit down at the TV, put the video in, or the DVD, and you can watch the footage of what maybe is a family video of what happened previously in your life. Or you can pull off a history book off the shelf of what happened centuries ago. You see, we can go miles backwards. But we can't go 1 millimetre forward in our thinking and our understanding. Oh, we make plans and we expect them to happen. We can say tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, but we don't know what will happen tomorrow. You and I cannot guarantee that we will even be alive this time tomorrow. This time last month, people sat, lovely evening like this, in the cool and in the quiet of their homes in Grantham and Murphy's Creek, not knowing that within a month their homes would be gone, and even some of them personally would be washed away in death. We heard a story of one of those situations. A lady whose house was just out of the rushing floodwater. She went to look at the water from the safety of her steps. It was just near the house, just there. She slipped in the wet and she was washed away to her death. just over at Marburg, just some 5-10 kilometres away from us here this afternoon. How during a rescue of a family, how a father was pulled to safety, but during the rescue, a 4-year-old boy fell from the boat into the deathly waters, leaving that poor rescuer on suicide watch. These are tragic stories. But friends, they are shouting a message to us. Are you listening? What is your life? God says in Hebrews 9:27, it is appointed for man to die once, and after this, the judgment. Do you hear what that says? What God is saying there? God has got an appointment book. It is appointed unto people like you and me to die once. God's got an appointment book. He's got a diary, if you like. And each one of us are written in that appointment book. We're all in it. And He's got the day in that book of what will be our last day. He knows the date of our death. None of us know when it is. The uncertainty of life. James says, you do not know what will happen tomorrow. So my fellow Queenslander, are you listening to what God is saying in these days? The third thing we can see in these verses is what we could call the frailty of life. We've seen the audacity in life, the uncertainty of life, but now, again, in verse 14, we see the frailty of life. What does James go on to say here? You do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapour. What's your life, God says? Oh, your life is just like a vapour. Your life is like a mist, a bit of smoke, a bit of moisture. Now, we've all seen that, haven't we? It's a cold morning, perhaps, and you look forward to that hot cuppa. You blow on it to cool it down so it doesn't burn your lips, and as you blow on it, as you puff on it, the steam comes up. There's a little mist that appears right in front of your eyes. How substantial, though, is that mist, that vapour? It's nothing, is it? It's so frail. With your hand, you can just swoosh it away. You blow and it comes, and then you just swoosh it away. Or it's a foggy morning and the mist settles in the valley or over the stream or on top of the area of the dam. But as soon as the heat of the sun rays falls on it, what happens? It goes. Or a breeze blows across the valley where that mist is, and as soon as the breeze comes, away goes the mist. Now, why doesn't the mist stand there and fight the wind? Just stand his ground and say, I'm not going anywhere. Well, it doesn't work like that, does it? Vapour is frail. You try and grasp it. Next time you go out for a walk and it's a foggy morning, you try and grasp it. There's not much to it. And here God is saying, our lives are like that. Our lives are frail. Now, you might be young. You might feel strong. You may even feel invincible tonight. But what's your life? God says, in your youthful strength, feeling like nothing can conquer you, your life's a vapour, God says. That's all it is. It's just like a whole lot of particles of moisture. Actually, that is very accurate. Did you realise that when we were born into this world, that a baby is 85 to 90% water? As a grown-up person, our water content can be around 70%. We have a body of frail water particles. What is your life? It's a vapour. Psalm 39 says, O Lord, make me know my end. And what is the measure of my days? Let me know how fleeting I am, he says. Behold, my lifetime is as nothing before you. Surely all mankind stands as a mere breath, as a mere vapour. I'm not sure how many of you know the name John Ilhan. Probably not a lot of you. But when I tell you about him, you'll know sort of John Ilhan. Ilhan was an Australian Muslim businessman. In 2003, he was voted Australia's richest man under 40 years of age. John Ilhan was the founder of Crazy John's mobile phone company, which has become the largest independent phone retailer in our country. You see the shops in shopping centres everywhere. Doesn't matter where you are, you seem to see Crazy John's. And no doubt you've seen that crazy Google-eyed cardboard cutout who stares at you as you're walking down the mall past the shops. John Ilhan's story is one of rags to riches. On a Monday night back in October 2007, a story was run on him on Channel 7, I think it was Today Tonight, and it talked about his past, his present and his future. It told how he made all of his money, how he had come from nothing, how he had got everything, and how he had grand plans for the future. An impressive story of rag to riches. The very next day, Tuesday, Ilhan was in the media again, this time not to talk about his plans of the future, but this time he was in the media because that morning he had died while exercising. He was only 42. The night before, the media showed him making plans, his plans for the future of how he was going to make more money. And the next night, the media showed the plans that were being made for John Ilhan's funeral. He seemed so successful, so confident, so fit. He seemed invincible. The frailty of life. Queensland has come face to face with that reality over the last 10 weeks, the frailty of life. Have you heard what God has been saying to you? Your life is frail. The question in James 4:14 is personal. What is your life? It's a vapour. God just needs to blow a little breeze into your vapour life, and you'll be blown from this world into the next. It is appointed to man to die once, but after this, the judgment. Are you ready for the judgment? You know, none of us can hide from God. What is your life? It's not a brick wall. It's a vapour. Vapour or mist is transparent. You can see through it. And my friend, so are you. Now, you might pretend to be a Christian. You might put on your Sunday best when you come to church. You may seem to blend in with others in the context of Christians, and no one would even question you, but God sees right through you. You can't hide anything from God in your life at all. There is no secret corner that God can't see into. Hebrews 4 says there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are naked and open to the eyes of him to whom we must give account. What is your life? It is nothing more than a see-through, frail vapour. Are you listening? The fourth thing I want to draw your attention to from verse 14, perhaps is the major thing that James is saying. And it's the last thing I want to say. And that is what I'm calling the brevity of life. God asks the question, what is your life? He says it's even a vapour that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Now, isn't that so true? You pick up that hot drink and the whisk of steam rises, but how long does it last? It's brief. It's there 1 second, it's gone the next. It rises, what? How high? 1 inch, maybe 2 inches, and that's it. It's gone. You walk outside early on that cold, frosty winter's morning, and you're walking along, and steam comes from your mouth. Vapour comes from your mouth. How long does it hang out there in the air? Well, it's barely there long enough even to be seen. It's gone. And God says that's your life. It is so brief. It passes so quickly. And again, in the book of Psalm, we read in Psalm 144, Lord, what is man that you take knowledge of him, or the Son of Man that you are mindful of him? Man is like a breath, he says. Man is like a puff of air. His days are like a passing shadow. And it's Moses that says in Psalm 90, the days of our lives are 70 years, and if by reason of strength they are 80 years. That's how long we live, he says. That is remarkably accurate, even in a day of advanced medical science. You know, the average life expectancy for a Queensland male? 79 years. The average life expectancy for a Queensland female is 83.6 years. When you look at the list of the ages in the different countries of the world, we are number 5 at the top. If we lived in Africa, many of those countries, it's around about average 50 years. There is no guarantee, though, is there, that any of us will ever in any way get near those top figures of those ages. Remember, we might not be able to have a problem with understanding and recording and looking back in the past. We don't have an issue about knowing about yesterday, but we don't know about tomorrow. Yesterday, I had a birthday. And that's one of the times when you're more likely to think about your life. You're more likely to think about how long you've been here, particularly when your children ask you, how old are you, Dad? You have to sort of answer that somehow. You know how long I've been living? Just over 16,000 days. Now, if I make it to 70, I have another 9,500 days. That means, you can do the maths, that here I am at age 44, so you haven't got to try and work it out yourself. I'm already past halfway. If you're about 20, and some of you are this evening, your life is nearly a third over. And that's if you make it as far as the average. And that's a big if. Our entire lives, however long they will be, even if we make it to 100 and defy the statistics, they are breath in the grand scale of eternity. Now, certainly when you're young, you have all your life before you, it seems like life is so long out in front. But you haven't got to be around too long to realise life is extremely short. God is saying, what is your life? What's his answer? It is a vapour that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. It disappears out of sight. But of course, what happens is that moisture that makes up the mist just changes, doesn't it? Into a different form, could we say. It's just that it disappears from human sight. That's what happens when our lives come to an end. We don't into nothing. We change places. When we die, we leave this world and we enter the next. The life present melts into the life to come. It is appointed unto man to die once, but after this, the judgment. What is your life, my friend? God's answer is even a vapour that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. We will also quickly be standing before the judgment seat of God. I will be. You will be. Are you ready to stand before the judgment seat of God? There is only one way that any person can ever be ready for that. It is by turning from your sin and seeing God's Son, Jesus Christ, as your only hope of salvation. It is by crying out to Him in prayer and asking Him to forgive you of all your sins, your sin of arrogant pride, seeking to live your own life without Him. Recognizing that not someone else, but that you are a guilty sinner before His righteousness. And that Jesus, His Son, came into this world to live the perfect life that you can never live. And to die on the cross that you would never dare to die, because God's wrath was poured upon that cross. He took the punishment for sinners. You see, you need to plead with Him even as you sit in your seat. You can ask Him to save you as you sit there right now. You don't need some formula, some procedure, some little thing you've got to do, some little ceremony. Just there in your seat, you can cry to God in prayer and you can ask Him to save you. God promises whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. There's no question about it. You sit there right now, you call out to God, God save me. And He's promised He will. Isn't that wonderful? The audacity in life, the uncertainty of life, the frailty of life, and the brevity of life. My friend, have you been listening tonight what God has been saying to you? What God has been saying to this state? But more particularly what God has been saying to you tonight in your spiritual state. Are you ready to die? What is your life? It's a vapour that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. There was a nurse from a World War I hospital ward caring for frail patients, soldiers. And she's written a diary. She writes in that diary about an injured soldier by the name of Private Fisher. And she says this in her diary, for the first time, speaking about Private Fisher, who she was caring for the first time he walked up and down the ward with the help of his nurse. It seemed he was getting better, but arriving back at his bed, Private Fisher sat down and shouted aloud in deep pain. When the nurse checked to see what was wrong, she saw a small spurt of blood coming out of his thigh. She goes on to say in her diary, the sharp edge of a splintered bone must have severed the artery. I instantly put my finger on the place and I waited for the surgeon. He soon came. He took a long look and then he shook his head. The artery had been severed and no earthly power could save him, said the surgeon. The young private then asked how long he had to live. And the nurse replied, only as long as I keep my hand squeezing your artery. The nurse then said, after a long pause, the private broke the silence. And then he said, you can let go. He was ready. At that point, the nurse fainted, and she was spared the sorrow of seeing the end of it all. Are you at that point, friend, that if you were lying on that bed as Private Fisher, that you could say, you can let go, because my soul is ready? I have the Lord Jesus as my Saviour. I am ready to die and meet my Maker. Are you ready to say, you can let me go now? The only way that you will ever be ready to meet your Maker and Judge is by first going to Jesus Christ for salvation. We're all in the hospital of life. Each of us have a booby trap of death lurking in our bodies. And at any moment, life could be over for us. What is your life? It's a vapour. Young Queenslander, older Queenslander, are you listening to what God has been saying to you? Oh, that you might call out to Him for salvation while you still have breath in your lungs. He has given you that breath. Can you not see the urgency? Today is the day of salvation. You do not know what will happen tomorrow. If you are not yet saved, I plead with you, call out to Him as you sit in that seat. Whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. May God be pleased to do that for some of you. Let's pray.